Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Community Relations Corner, where we discuss issues of concern to New York's Jewish community and our friends and neighbors and partners all over the city. I'm your host, Michael Miller, the Executive Vice President and CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, or the JCRC. On each episode of Community Relations Corner, we're joined by guests representing the political, religious, economic, and diverse community leadership in New York, many of whom I've had the honor and pleasure of getting to know during my tenure at JCRC as the CEO. Together, we'll explore topics spanning their interests, their backgrounds, and current events impacting the New York Jewish community and its neighbors, as well as our state, our city, and our nation. But first, a word of thanks to our sponsor. This episode of the Community Relations Corner is sponsored by the Free Synagogue of Flushing, serving the Reformed Jewish community in Queens, New York for over a century. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org for a 360-degree panorama of its magnificent stained glass sanctuary and immerse yourself in a piece of Queens Jewish history. Join us for a wide array, us is the synagogue, for a wide array of programming and webinars. And the beautiful sanctuary, social hall, and meditation garden are available for rent to add to your joyous occasions. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org to learn about Shabbat services and weekly Sunday school. Once again, it's freesynagogueflushing.org. And now we turn to our very, very special guest. We're honored to have with us somebody with whom I feel extremely close. He is the founder, CEO, and spiritual leader of the renowned Christian Cultural Center in Brooklyn with more than 37,000 members, an author, the founder of the Christian Community Relations Council. We should talk about that a little bit. And not only my companion, but he's on the executive committee. I'm just a member of the Commission of Religious Leaders of Choral, which is led by Cardinal Dolan. But Reverend Bernard is right there in the leadership of Choral. And it's my pleasure to welcome my dear friend, Pastor A.R. Bernard. Welcome.
Thank you so much, my dear brother and friend, for so many years. My goodness, it's been quite a while that we've been engaged here in New York City trying to make the world a better place.
Well, you look much younger than I do. So even if it's been quite a long time, you're getting younger and I'm not. But let's get to know for our viewers as to who it is that I'm speaking with. You left a full-time career in the banking industry to follow God's calling and go into the ministry full-time. And maybe even more astonishing is your success. Over time, you've built what I believe is, you can confirm, the largest church in New York, the Christian Cultural Center, where I have been on several occasions. We could talk about that too. And the building can host, the structure can host, I think it's 13,000 people. It's a huge, huge, huge sanctuary. Tell us your story and how you were able to actually change paths and build this community of faith.
Wow. In addition, of course, to God's hand on my life, that's the source of it all. But there's also what we do, what I've done. 10 years in banking, I had my epiphany in 1975, and that translated into a higher calling. So by the end of that decade, November 1979, I decided to go full-time into ministry. And it was quite a small beginning. My wife and I started with a small congregation, quite similar when you think about establishing a Jewish synagogue. You get 10 families together and you get it planted. Well, yeah, there were just a handful of us, and we started out, and it continued to grow. And what I found was an ability to communicate and articulate the scripture in a way that people can, number one, practically apply it in their daily life and relationship, but also develop a lens through which they can make sense of the world around them, socially, politically, spiritually, morally. And that's what really began to draw people. So we went through a process to, here it is 42 years later, and we are
It's
called the
42
Christian
years already?
Cultural Center. Yeah, it's been 42 years of ministry.
Wow.
And we're called the Christian Cultural Center by design because we live and thrive at the intersection of faith and culture. We see the church not only as a religious institution, but also as a social cultural institution.
That's fascinating. As I mentioned, I've been there on several occasions. One was to present you with our Martin Luther King Jr. Award, which was a real pleasure. It's my first time in the sanctuary, and just to see what you have created there, what you have established there. But I came a second, at least several more times. But one of the times I came back was the same award was presented to Gloria Gaynor, the well-known vocalist. But that was at a Sunday service. So that was, again, quite an experience. What is it about the CCC that is so attractive to your membership that rather than go to another church, they come to the Christian Cultural Center? What do you think the draw, what the attraction is?
Again, I think that it's a combination of things. Number one, they're attracted to my style of communication, which is more of a teacher.
Yes.
And having a conversation with my audience about faith and how we make sense again of the world around us. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to live in this world? How do we understand a relationship with God? And also the creation of a community of shared values, ideas, and vision, and hopes and dreams, well founded on the family as the foundation for society, a strong emphasis on building men and the complementary role between men and women, especially in the context of marriage. So these values, made it very, very attractive to people who subscribe to those values. So it gathered very quickly. And great music, of course, with our
Yes.
worship and our band and our singers and our performing arts. So it's really a community that we forged relationships in over the years.
What was it, the situation where, because the building is quite sizable, where like Field of Dreams, build it and they will come, or were they already there and you just had to build in order to accommodate the membership?
Well, I will tell you, I'm quite pragmatic. So we were in a building that only held 1,300 people. And that was through the decade of 1989 to 1999. And we were having 5 services on a Sunday and 1 service during the week, and then classes, et cetera, during the week. So we just outgrew it. People were standing online, for an hour to get in. And we had to create a tent and a place to keep them warm during the winter. So we were in desperate need of a new space that could accommodate such a already large, but rapidly growing congregation. Additionally, we understood that we had something that people found attractive, and it continued to grow exponentially. Every 10 years, we experience an exponential curve of growth. And that has been the pattern, since we started in 1978.
Thank you. You had mentioned a moment or two ago about the amalgam of faith and culture. So let's just talk about faith for a few minutes. Polls have been conducted that show that religion and religious affiliation is less important today to Americans. Why must faith be important, most especially here in New York, from your perspective?
Well, interestingly enough, as human beings, we are both religious and political, the two very things that we're told not to talk about because we're going to get into some type of an argument over. But we're wired that way. We're religious in that the desire for God or the divine is written, I believe, on every human heart. And also, we have a conscience that bears witness to a transcendent moral standard. So we are religious by nature. We're political by nature because, we all have an opinion, a view, a judgment, a perspective on things. So the moment you have an opinion, it's politics because well, not only that, but so beautifully expressed in the scripture in Proverbs, it says that every man seems wise in his own eyes. So not only do we have an opinion, but we think we're right. And then we communicate it and find others who agree. And all of a sudden it turns into Republicans and Democrats, liberals, left, right, and special interests.
And how do we
That's how
rise? So
society
how do we
works.
rise above that?
Yeah. Well, I look. First of all, religion brings a moral value consensus
Correct.
to society, and we need that because a moral value consensus that is universal and transcends cultural context. Because within the culture, it can have certain ethics and laws that are not moral when it comes to a universal moral standard. So we have to go through changes in our codes and systems and our thinking, when we hold it to a higher moral standard. So that's necessary, to have justice and concord within the society. We also need, civic structure, that's government, to prevent chaos and provide order. And both the secular and the sacred are vital to society, and they must remain in a delicate balance. And sometimes, we struggle to maintain that balance. But I think they all come together, in your belief system, tradition, and our tradition, we believe that heaven and earth are one. And the idea is seeing them come together to have a civilization, society, the
Right.
way it should be.
And yet there, of course, there are challenges to how our moral fiber, how our value system reacts to contemporary issues. You and I were both involved in a meeting this morning of the Commission of Religious Leaders. And one of the issues that was discussed was the issue of homelessness. How do we deal with the regrettable expansion of homelessness in New York? And what our obligations as religious leaders are to provide for them while ensuring that the quality of life the people who we represent in our respective houses of worship, that their quality of life doesn't diminish.
What you just said, the quality of life comes from a very specific moral value system. In both of our traditions, we believe, excuse me, we believe deeply in the life and dignity of the human person. And when we believe that all human beings share that dignity, share that life, and should be respected, then we will be concerned how our society in its systems, structures, legal codes, and processes and policies treat each individual, regardless of the color of their skin, their faith tradition, their class, their gender. Everyone is conferred by God the status of the image of God, that status of human dignity. So I think it begins with that value, and that's some of what we bring as houses of worship and people of faith to society. We also bring the common good. That there we can debate about what the common good is, but at least we know that there is a concern in our society for everyone within that society, especially the disenfranchised, the most vulnerable in society, such as homeless, issues of poverty, which again should influence our policy. We believe in the solidarity of the human family, that we are our brother's keeper, that we are responsible for each other. We can't turn, a deaf ear or turn our face away when we see our brothers and sisters in need. And also solidarity, the belief that those closest to the problems are best able to address the problems and need to be empowered by government, to address those problems. So I think that, there are essential values that we share that bring faith together with agencies and collectively addressing the social issues.
You're absolutely correct. And we do look to our political leaders to give us that direction. They're the ones who make the laws and enforce the laws. And yet, and you had spoken as well about politics entering into reinforcing values. But I think that the political arena right now is split, and it's not just divided, but it's sharply polarized. Polarized to a high extreme. And I just wrestle with this all the time as to whether our culture, our societal culture is broken. And once again, whether religious leadership, faith, can play a role in attempting to mend a highly divided society. It's very difficult to disagree with somebody when the points of view are such polar opposites, as well as what we have seen all too frequently. And if we watch television news shows, we see it on our screens, is not, again, the disagreement, but the demonization of those who are not on the same page that we are. And obviously, as we're moving towards November the 3rd and the election, the polarity, it just increases exponentially day by day.
I think our challenge is to sort through the rhetoric that creates the fears that, when we think critically, are mostly unfounded. You take the fear that the left may have based upon the rhetoric that's out there concerning the present administration, that gives the impression that, everyone's not welcome in America, that all people don't matter, everyone is not to be treated with dignity and respect. The idea even that religious values are intrinsic in a political party, that's false. That's not true. And then you have the fears on the right towards the left. Their fear that somehow the left is saying that the only answer to what ails America is government control. Government should control private property and trade and everything. And of course, that points us in the direction of socialism and a socialistic state. So they're afraid of that. Those are the fears that are fostered by the rhetoric. The reality is that historically, America has been a dual political economy, a mixed political economy, for since its founding. We believe in free enterprise, trade, translating our gift, talents, and abilities into value in the marketplace. And at the same time, when necessary, we have government intervention to address social issues, like Social Security, like Medicare, like workers' compensation. These are social programs. So it's not the fear. The fear of going to an extreme is not legitimate. We have been a wonderful blend and mix of the two ideas, and we need to continue to build on that. So sorting through the rhetoric that's coming from mass media, no matter what network you watch, has been the challenge for voters. And we could say, I've heard the expression "vote your conscience," but I don't know what informs your conscience. So I'm not going to tell you to vote your conscience. If your conscience has not been informed by transcendent moral values, I would say vote your values. What's most important to you? What do you hold dear? What's your greatest concern? And what party or what candidate best represents those values?
And how, by what measure do people gauge their own value system? I don't doubt that in your sermons preached from the pulpit, that there are messages of value gradation, and the essential role that values play in our life. But it's not so simple to tell a congregant just open up the holy book, open up a Bible, open up the Testament, and you'll find your values. How do you guide your congregation in trying to sort out and gradate their value system?
Well, look, there are a set of values that we can all agree upon, and then there's a value system, how we prioritize those values. And that's where we can disagree, because one group may feel one shared value is more important than the other shared value, and that's where we disagree. But I think that, that's what our faith is about. Our faith informs us. For us, when we speak of the kingdom of God, or the reign and rule of God, the order of God, we're talking about a comprehensive way of seeing life that informs our thoughts, our words, our actions, our motives, our attitudes, and our choices. And based upon how, the value system of our faith shapes the way we think, it should translate into the choices that we make, even politically. So, I don't tell people who to vote for. I won't do that. And supposedly we're not allowed to, but many do it anyway. But I won't do it. But I want you to think critically. And also, what's the record? What is the individual's record on these issues that you are concerned about? And do you think that they will continue to best represent those concerns? So it's not just religious values. We're talking about those things that are important to you. In the community of color, we're talking about a concern about racialized policing system, racialized criminal justice system, racialized immigration system, inequities in education, inequities in economic opportunity, inequities in healthcare. These are very, very real concerns. Now, someone else's threshold may be different. I'm sure the Jewish community would be very concerned about, how where that candidate stands on the Jewish people, the state of Israel, Jewish concerns, and I know that even your community, like ours, is not monolithic. No. So you really have to determine, after thinking critically, what's important to you, and then prioritize that and let it shape and inform your choice when it comes to politics.
Right. Thank you for that. And we're going to get to some of those issues after we once again thank our sponsor for this episode of Community Relations Corner, which is brought to us by a synagogue, the Free Synagogue of Flushing, serving the Reformed Jewish community in Queens, New York for over a century. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org for a 360-degree panorama of its magnificent stained glass sanctuary. Immerse yourself in a piece of Queens Jewish history. Join Free Synagogue of Flushing for a wide array of programming and webinars, and the beautiful sanctuary, social hall, and meditation garden are available for rent to add to your joyous occasions. Please visit freesynagogueflushing.org to learn about their Sabbath, their Shabbat services, and weekly Sunday school. Once again, visit freesynagogueflushing.org. And Reverend Pastor, friend, one of the key issues that you raised in answering my last question was the issue of justice. One of the major issues that New Yorkers, Americans, but particularly here in the New York area are struggling with is achieving justice. And there are so many different kinds of justice that are being sought: social justice, racial justice, environmental justice, food justice, urban justice, and others. And even within our Jewish community, there's a great diversity on these issues, and even several different definitions as to how one might understand the biblical call to justice. The thinking of Deuteronomy 16:20, tzedek, tzedek tirdov, justice, justice shall you pursue. How would you, as a central faith leader, a leading faith leader in the New York area, and for your congregants, describe the concept of justice? And is there a difference between justice and social justice?
No, well, look, justice is a theme throughout the scripture. The problem comes into play be- because of your differing hermeneutic. Depending upon your hermeneutic, how you interpret the scripture in what it says about justice. But I think that, you know, justice plays a very important role in society because justice is fairness, it's equity. In a very broad sense of the word, justice is the principle that each person or community receive what they deserve. Look, politics is power. Who has it and who is benefiting from that power? So, justice comes into play. And the problem, of course, is the word deserve. Who determines what each person or community deserves? So, we have to debate the common good. We have to debate and fight for justice. That's why I learned early on, it's not called a court of justice, it's called a court of law, and we go in to fight for justice. That's the way it is. And whoever can make the best argument wins. So justice is important because it regulates all human relationships, whether that justice is distributive, procedural justice, restorative, retributive justice. Justice speaks to the major principles of our Christian social ethic, and I'm sure your Jewish social ethic, as I talked about, the life and dignity of the human person, the common good, subsidiarity, solidarity of the human family. These things are very, very critical. So justice is about fairness and equity. And I do make the distinction between equity and equality. The Bible speaks least about equality, even though it does, but most about justice, fair play. And we appeal to God. That's what we do as part of our faith tradition, because we know that the playing field of life is not level. So, we need divine intervention, government intervention, programmatic intervention, because that's the world that we live in.
Thank you. And innumerable Jewish commentators offer opinions as to why the word justice is repeated in that verse. Justice shall you pursue, Deuteronomy, Devarim 16:20, Tet Zayin Chaf in Hebrew. So, and one of the interpretations that actually is a Hasidic interpretation that is widely identified with is that in pursuing justice, justice needs to be pursued with justice. That there are different, as you said before, the different levels of justice. It isn't just that you step into a court of law. The question is, once you are there, are you being treated fairly? Is the person sitting in the robe, wearing the robe, is that person prejudiced or unprejudiced? So pursuing justice you need to pursue justice with justice. Is there an interpretation of that verse that you can share with our viewers?
Well, look, we've got what we call the Old and New Testament, the Hebrew scriptures and our New Testament scriptures. And we refer strongly back to the Hebrew scriptures in the book of the prophet Isaiah, chapter 59. And he talks about the state of society at the time and the abandonment of truth. And the passage says beautifully, truth is fallen in the street.
Right.
Justice is turned backward, and therefore equity cannot enter. So it's difficult to have justice without truth and moral standards. And that's why the moral value consensus that we bring to society as religious organizations and institutions is critical, because we are about truth, and truth and justice work together. And you can have witnesses with their perspectives and you have to try to get to the truth.
Right.
Truth doesn't come just like that. So that's a beautiful text for us, along with to love mercy, to do justice, and to walk humbly with God. These are texts that remind us that, again, justice regulates all human relationships.
Yeah, well, I look forward, not going to have it now, but I look forward to a private conversation that you'll have about that verse in Isaiah, which actually plays
Mhm.
into the verse in Deuteronomy, but we're not going to get into that now. Again, our listeners should know, our viewers should know that Reverend Bernard and I do communicate frequently pertaining to Scripture and what our respective interpretations. But I want to carry this message, this theme, excuse me, of justice to probably the social justice issue of our day, the pursuit of justice that would combat racism, systemic racism, and the Black Lives Matter movement. There is some controversy within the Jewish community over BLM due to a group not as known as BLM, but known as the Movement for Black Lives, that released a platform a number of years ago describing Israel as an apartheid and genocidal state. Obviously, this type of rhetoric is understandably very troubling to us and could be a barrier for Jewish organizations, let alone individuals, to identify with this cause and joining the fight against racism and systemic racism. So I'm sure that our viewers would be interested in knowing, as an African American, your take on BLM as a philosophy and BLM as an organization, and how within your ministry you relate to this cause.
Well, you asked me a question and I failed to define it. You asked me about social justice specifically. And let me just say this, and
Yes.
then I'll go into a response to the BLM question. Social justice we live in an age of privileged classes and radical individualism, especially here in the West. So there's a need for justice for the common good, which is called social justice. So essentially, social justice is justice for the common good, assuring fairness and equity in access and opportunity to services, to goods, to fairness in our legal systems, in our prison systems, in how law and order is maintained. So those things are very, very, very important to us. Now, when it comes to Black Lives Matter, there's a difference between a philosophical revolution and an ideological revolution. A philosophical revolution is one that seeks to find and understand the issues, the natural order, values, and principles, and come to a collective consensus on the best way to address these issues. So Black Lives Matters as a philosophy that Black lives do matter. And it's not that we're saying other lives don't matter. That's not what we're saying. But when there is in the community a segment of the population that is underserved, disenfranchised, marginalized, then it is important that society as a whole attend to that underserved community. It does not say that society forsakes all others. No. In addition to addressing the needs of the whole, there is a specific need present within that disenfranchised community. So the philosophy that Black life does matter, I subscribe to wholly and wholeheartedly. But an ideological revolution is a revolution where someone has made up their mind on what's best for everybody. And without any collaboration or conversation or civil discourse, they seek to impose it on society. And that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about Black Lives Matters as an organization with a set of values and mission that I disagree with. Because if you look carefully at their stated values, it's talking about dismantling the family as we know it and replacing it with something.
I think you answered my question amply. And I want to shift from that to what I referenced in regard to attitudes within the Jewish community towards this movement, both philosophically as well as organizationally. And like for years, dating back into the 1920s and 1930s and through the civil rights movement, there was a strong alliance between the Black and Jewish communities. And subsequent to the civil rights movement back in the mid 60s, there's been like a falling out between the two communities, a distancing. Some of that has been repaired, and some of it hasn't been repaired. And particularly now, where the Black Lives Matter philosophically, that movement is seeking justice and combating racism, at the same time that we're seeking an end to anti-Semitism and, in essence, justice for our Jewish community. There might be a better opportunity for there to be a coalition rebuilt between the Black and Jewish communities. And I'm just wondering whether you feel the same way that I do about that. Are we in a moment of opportunity for our Jewish and Black communities to begin to reform the partnership, the very close partnership they once had?
You know, the Black and Jewish community in many ways has had a shared history. We also have a shared set of values. And from time to time, things have happened to undermine the relationship that we've had working together, going all the way back to the early part of this country's history with slavery, and Jews who were abolitionists in the state of Georgia. Interesting story about their support of the changes that needed to be made, and the connection made in the North with Northern Jews to see Black Americans freed. The relationship of the Jewish and the Black community throughout the civil rights movement. So we have a wonderful history of partnering to address these issues. And from time to time, there are those who have tried to undermine that issue. So that partnership. So I'm not surprised that is happening today. But I think at the core, there is great opportunity right now to recognize that core partnership that we've had historically and build upon it. And that's why I make no apologies for my relationship with the Jewish community and my willingness to support them and them to support me on shared issues and values. I make no apologies about that, because I think building those bridges, maintaining those bridges that we built are important to seeing change in our society across the board. We need each other's influence. It's just like someone who told me, well, we Black folks have to make this happen. The reality is that we can't do it alone in America. We need the cooperation of other communities, including white community, And I will tell you, I think the spirit of things now is quite different. For the first time in American history, we have seen a national consensus of moral outrage concerning the injustices that have taken place against African Americans at the hands of police. When the nation saw that picture of the police officer's knee lingering for 8 minutes and 43 seconds on the neck of George Floyd until he died because he could not breathe, that brought our nation together in ways that we have never seen. Back in the 1960s with the civil rights movement, the segregationists doubled down on their segregationism, pushing back against these changes. But for the first time in our history, we see this national consensus of moral outrage. I cannot tell you how many white colleagues of mine were calling me saying, look, we feel, man, what your community is going through. What can we do? And this is quite different from Dr. King in the 60s, sitting in the Birmingham jail, writing a letter, asking the question, where are the white clergy? Where is the church? Where are my brothers and sisters? So this is a special time. And if we read it correctly, we'll build alliances, we'll partner, we'll build relationships, and be very much aware that there will be voices that try to undermine that.
I agree with you, but I think that one of the things which is missing is central leadership behind this movement. There are individual leaders, some with significant following, such as yourself, but the movement itself is seemingly unstructured and not not centrally formed to be representative of a broad swath of followers within the Black community and elsewhere. So combating racism, combating systemic racism, dealing with the police departments, dealing with the justice system, all needs to be addressed. But it would be beneficial if there was some centrality to the effort as opposed to what we're dealing with now. I mean, there might be individuals who refer to themselves as, "Oh, I represent Black Lives Matter," but to the best of my knowledge, there's no Martin Luther King Jr. as an example.
Yeah, and that's by design. These millennials who are, and also now joined by Gen Zs, these individuals who are, calling for change and who are involved in the movement, by design, don't want one particular voice. They have not appreciated the centralization of efforts, the collaboration necessary, and picking someone to be that voice. So when the mayor called for a meeting with Black Lives Matter, 15 different organizations showed up for that meeting.
That's interesting.
So you're right. There is not that coalescing of organizations and communities to say, okay, we want this individual to represent us, or this grouping of individuals to represent us. And it's indicative of the times in which we live. This generation is disenchanted with some of the existing organizations like the NAACP, even like the National Action Network with Al Sharpton. They're disillusioned with Congress of Racial Equality. And these organizations that have been around for so long and they feel should have done more to affect change. Why are we dealing with the same issues 100 years later? So they're blaming these organizations. It's just like the distinction that they're making between religion and spirituality. They're rejecting religion and embracing spirituality. That's another conversation. How do we codify that? How do we pass that on from generation to generation? What does that even look like? But what they're really saying is we reject the established organized religious systems that have failed us. So, this is a time of upheaval. And I think that what's going to happen is that I think certain voices will emerge to take the lead. I think that we are not at the end of something. I think we're at the beginning of something that has to take greater shape and form in order for us to understand it and appreciate it and respond to it the way we need to.
Well, I hope that you are correct on that. I think it would be very beneficial for the cause, for individuals to rise up and to take leadership stances. We in the Jewish community are somewhat over-organized. One organization on top of another. There are only 15 that met with the mayor. That's progress. But all joking aside, I want to go back to a point that I raised earlier regarding the Movement for Black Lives manifesto of 4 years ago and the accusations that Israel is an apartheid state. The Martin Luther King Award that was presented to you was not only presented to you by the JCRC, but centrally, it was presented by the Consulate General of Israel in New York. Similarly, the Consul General at the time, Danny Dayan, spoke from your pulpit. Where do you see the state of Israel, a cause which is so fundamental to the Jewish world? where do you see the state of Israel within, first of all, Christian Cultural Center, but within the Black community as a whole? Is it a positive value or is it a negative value?
Well, for the theology of our house, it's a positive value. But again, keep in mind, like the Jewish community is not monolithic, the Black community is not monolithic. So there are those within our religious framework who understand and value the nation of Israel, its right to exist, as a nation, and support it. And there are those who do not support it. That's the way it is. But like a wonderful passage says, as for me and my house, we support the nation of Israel and appreciate its value given to us through our faith, through our Judeo-Christian faith, but also as a nation, its right to exist. I have been there from time to time, having conversations with you, holding Israel, the nation of Israel, accountable when I felt that some of its choices, some of its policies were not wholesome. The treatment of Ethiopian Jews, things that are part of your history. So we hold each other accountable, and that's the way it should be. But when it comes to our right to exist, that is non-negotiable.
Well, that's really that is very heartwarming to us. And as we draw this conversation to a close, I think we're leaving it on a very high note. And I know of your support for the state of Israel. I know that you have traveled there quite a number of times. And I certainly cherish the relationship that I've had with you and that the Jewish community will continue to have with you, as well as the Israeli consulate and the state of Israel. So on behalf of all, I really do want to offer my gratitude to you for spending so much time with me in this conversation. And I think it's very important within our Jewish community to hear from Pastor A.R. Bernard and to share with him our views on things and his views on things, and engage in this back and forth as he and I have done over the many years. So on behalf of all of us, thank you, Pastor Bernard, for coming on to Community Relations Corner. And one last time, we really want to thank our sponsor. Without the sponsorship, we wouldn't have this program. And the episode, of course, is sponsored by our dear friends at the Free Synagogue of Flushing. Its president, Ed Schauder, is a member of the Jewish Community Relations Council board, and its cantor, Alan Brava, is a dear friend, serving the Reformed Jewish community in Queens, New York for over a century. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org for a 360-degree panorama of its magnificent stained glass sanctuary, and immerse yourself in a piece of Queens Jewish history. Pastor Bernard, not that far away from where you are in Canarsie, so might be something we could arrange. We should join Free Synagogue of Flushing for a wide array of programming and webinars, and the beautiful sanctuary, social hall, and meditation garden are available for rent for joyous occasions. Visit freesynagogueflushing.org to learn about their Shabbat and holiday services and weekly Sunday school. Once again, freesynagogueflushing.org. Our thanks, our deep, deep, deep thanks to Pastor Bernard for joining us. Thanks to our audience for joining us live, and those who are watching us on tape, which will be edited. I'm Michael Miller, the CEO of the JCRC in New York, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Community Relations Corner. Thank you very much, Pastor Bernard, and shalom to all.